45 minutes later, he felt the boat drop down deeper into the water. The captain cut the craft's speed and deftly steered them between a scattering of islands, each one the size of a small house and deserted. Craig's wolf, already unhappy with the boat ride, shifted suddenly. The fog here was thicker, a grey soup that hung heavy on the water. Visibility was close to nil, and the only thing he could sense was the salt of the sea air. "What is that?" Craig asked. The air was almost electric, something akin to static electricity raising the hair on his arms and his wolf's hackles. Magnus smiled. "That, Mr. Johansson, is my first line of defense." With those cryptic words, the boat turned and the fog parted. The sky was still grey, the clouds above heavy with rain, but visibility cleared, and Craig watched as they passed into a narrow channel. One eye on the gauges, the captain stuck his head out the window of the wheelhouse, shouting back and forth with the crew member as the two men navigated their way through shallow waters rife with rocks. As they came through the channel, Craig got his first good look at the island and the bay. The bay wasn't that big, enough room for two, perhaps three boats to lay anchor. Turning toward the island, Craig was able to mask his surprise, but just barely. The castle stood sentinel, tall and proud on top of the heavily wooded island. Its lower half had been built directly into the mountain rock, while battlements reached for the sky. Something out of the Middle Ages, the only thing missing was a heraldic flag. "Welcome to Tartarus, Mr. Johansson," Magnus said as the boat slid up to the dock. Boone stood ashore waiting for them, hands clasped loosely in front of him, and those mirrored sunglasses that were clearly part of the bodyguard's uniform fixed firmly in place. "Good afternoon, sir. I trust all is well." Magnus led the way off the dock. A golf cart took the small group up the hill and around to the front of the castle. Magnus turned in the front seat, his arm resting comfortably on the back of the seat. "Have you ever heard of Thomas Nielsen?" At the shake of Craig's head, Magnus continued. "An eccentric millionaire. He built this place in the late 1950s for his new bride. Unfortunately, there was a sudden downturn in the economy, and Nielsen lost everything. The man threw himself from the West Tower," Magnus said, indicating the offending structure with the tip of his head. His much younger wife found him broken on the rocks below. Magnus turned to look out the front of the cart. They had reached the top of the hill, the terrain evening out as they passed through what in medieval times would have been the Barbican and into the Bailey. Nielsen's heirs immediately put the place on the market, but no one wanted to buy it. This island is accessible only by boat. The terrain won't allow for a helicopter pad, let alone a landing strip. Not surprising, Magnus added, climbing out of the cart and leading the way to the main building. There wasn't much of a demand for reclusive castles in the 50s, or any time since. "Must have been a steal," Craig said, passing through the front door and into the great hall. Magnus laughed. "Indeed it was. But that's not why I bought it, Mr. Johansson." "Craig." Magnus's eyes fairly sparkled. "Craig, you see, I bought it because Nielsen was a stickler for details." Magnus led the way through the great hall where tapestries lined the walls and a table sat waiting to serve the Lord's knights. Through another door, down the hall, and then Magnus was turning, leading Craig down a narrow set of stairs. The castle comes complete with battlements, ramparts, even arrow loops. The staircase spiraled down, the air surprisingly warm despite the old stone and island location. The castle may have been built to the specifications of the Middle Ages, but it had all the modern comforts Craig would expect of a man like Magnus. "But what's the point of having a castle?" Magnus asked, stepping aside to let Craig see past him. "If you don't have a dungeon?" Craig stopped short of stepping off the last stair. Inside, his wolf crouched, lips pulled back in a silent snarl at the idea of being caged. "What is this?" "This," Magnus preened, "is my private collection."